Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to reiterate the content warning just given. In particular, this episode covers the sexual abuse of children, which includes the lived experiences of one young person who we are honoured to have allowed us to share her story with us, which some listeners may find distressing and should be considered unsuitable for children. Now, today's episode, as I mentioned, deals with the topic of sexual abuse, and this episode originally focused on the support that's in place to support survivors of sexual abuse in the county. However, whilst in the process of recording the episode, I was approached by a young person who was keen to share her story with you today and, importantly, explain to us her experiences so that we can learn from what happened to her, both from the abuse that she has experienced and, importantly, from how services responded to that abuse, including what helped and what didn't help. So I'd like to introduce you now to AJ, who I'm sure you'll find, as I did when I met with her, is an incredible and inspirational young woman.
So I was sexually abused by my father for 7 years. And I spoke up when I was 15. So it started about maybe 8, nearly 9. So I spoke up when I was 15, and I basically, it all came up, kind of blurted out to a teacher saying I wasn't happy at home and things happened. And then I was told to sort of write up everything. And that's how it started, from speaking up and everything. But yeah.
So what happened on the day that you told somebody?
I can't actually remember half like the beginning process. I think looking back, I was running a lot of adrenaline because I can't remember actually telling. I know who I told, but I can't remember saying anything. It's all like one big blur. It was such a chaotic day sort of thing. I always thought about telling someone, but I never actually thought I would, sort of thing.
So who did you actually tell, and why did you decide that they were the person that you trusted?
So this teacher, she's sort of like the teacher that I went to a lot. But I can't remember the main reason. I think I had a really bad morning at the beginning with my parents, and then I kind of went to school, bad mood, and then it all just came out, and it came out in her lesson sort of thing. So that's probably why I told her.
How did you feel when you did actually say something?
At first, I regretted talking. I was like, actually, no, this is the truth. I just made this up. Sorry. But then I realised this could be the start of him stopping. And they took it further, which helped. I could just remember that my parents are going to be so disappointed in me. And just more that they're just going to be really disappointed in me. I was more worried of going home, so afterwards.
Why did you feel you'd be letting people down, or feel that your family would be disappointed in you?
Because it was a promise between us, and I don't like breaking promises. So it was like a huge deal, breaking a promise. The school said they were going to speak to my parents until the following morning, just so I'd be sort of safe going home. So I went home and everything was normal. I had a college interview, then went in the morning, and then they rang the police. Yeah.
Well, okay. So in amongst everything that was going on for you, you had a college interview as well.
Oh, I don't even remember doing the college interview. I don't even remember it until I looked back into the court, like the whole court proceeding and stuff, and their notes and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I had a college interview that day. Don't you remember it until recently?
How was the support offered by the school?
It could have been way better. As soon as the police involved, they kind of didn't really do much afterwards. It was they left it to the social workers, the police. They stepped back. The only thing they did was during that day, I was in a separate room, which kind of made it worse a little bit more because I was sat with my own thoughts sort of thing. But that's the only thing they did. They just left it to the professionals.
So just take us back for a moment then. You said that after your college interview, you went back into school, and at that point, that's when the police were called. Can you kind of talk us through about what happened next?
I went into school and it was all normal. And then after I'd done registration, they called me down to the office, and I was there when they rang the police. And then the police officer came and spoke to me first, and then said they were going to go off and arrest my father. And then by the end of the day, so about 3:00, the office said that my mum and police officers, social workers were in the like a waiting area. So I went out there, and I remember I went to go and hug my mum. I just went to my mum, and she pushed me away. She didn't speak to me until we got into the car away from the police. And I can remember her saying, "How could I not notice? You're my daughter." And she was like, "Does this make me a bad mum?" And that's the only nice thing she probably said before it turned into, if you're lying now, you could say, "Stop." And it just turned from there, yeah. My mum took control. Everything went from my mum then to me, which I guess kind of should happen because I was a minor. I was only 15. But everything was watered down for my mum, so I didn't feel betrayed at all. It was awful because we had to drive to Westham, and on the drive, that drive's quite long, and on the drive there, my mum kept telling me, "You can stop this now, we can work this out together." So when I got into the actual interview room, I think it took me 20-25 minutes to actually say something, and I think my actual police interview wasn't sufficient enough at all because I barely said anything, or I wasn't speaking loud enough because I could still hear my mum, and I could still, because the door wasn't quite soundproof, I heard my mum cry. So it was quite, as a 15-year-old, that was quite a lot.
So you had the police involvement, and presumably Children's Social Care also became involved at this point. How did that feel?
There was a social worker assigned to us straight away, and I met her during our police interview. Then she worked with us for maybe 2-3 weeks, and then we were assigned someone else. My mum fed information to my head saying social workers they just don't do their jobs. They're going to ruin our family. So in my head, I felt like I needed to avoid her. I think she was actually okay. But our first one wasn't okay. I don't know how I did not struggle. I look back now and I feel quite frustrated because I wish I could have been a bit more stronger and been able to face my mum and be like, "Actually, this is happening. You need to face it."
Can you talk us through about what happened after you were interviewed by the police?
My father was put under arrest, and then I went home. And then I think it was the next day, my mum came upstairs to my room holding a piece of paper and pen saying I needed to write a letter to the police saying I'm lying. She did this maybe 3-4 times. And I had to physically hand it in. I had to write it. I had to hand it in. She made me and she watched me hand it in. sometimes, I think the fourth time she actually handed it in herself, saying I was too scared to hand it in. But every time I handed it in and then the police came straight to me, I kept saying, look, I don't want to, this isn't right. I don't want, this letter isn't true. I couldn't say my mum made me write it because I didn't want to lose another parent. So it just looked bad on me, thinking, kept changing my mind.
Well, okay. It sounds as if that situation at home was incredibly difficult. Did you stay, living with your mum?
We broke up for Christmas break and I was taken into temporary foster placement. And then I was moved into my nan not long before Christmas. And then I lived with my nan for about 9 months or so. And I did all my GCSEs while I was with my nan. And then I moved back home with my mum and dad. We did like an introduction back to seeing my dad. And he did speak to me to say hello, didn't do anything. So I made no effort. And it was really awkward, but we were just trying to put a smile on our faces, trying to brave for it because my younger sister had no idea what was going on. She was too young to know.
I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you.
I think Christmas was the Christmas after I moved in, the most awkward time because everyone else got like card to my dad's side of the family. And I didn't get one. I didn't get any presents, nothing. I think that was the awkward time. And that's when I realised that actually maybe this isn't the best place to be. Yeah.
So I understand that after this, you went into foster care.
It was quite scary because it got to 7 o'clock at night and my mum left the house in a hurry, very distressed, and I was a bit confused at what was going on. And then we had like a shared phone between me and my brother, and the phone went off and it was my mum saying that I need to go and pack me and my sister a bag. And she said, make sure you got plenty of stuff because I don't know how long you'll be. And originally it was me going to my nan, which is on my mum's side. And we went off and it was about maybe 9 o'clock at night that my nan came to pick me up, pick my sister up. And then we were there and we haven't had dinner yet. So my nan ordered dinner in for us. And then a social worker knocked on their door saying that they're taking us into foster placement it's originally for the night until they could register my nan. But we were there for maybe a week or two. I think we arrived about after midnight and me and my sister shared that bed. We had our own rooms, but we shared like a single bed because we were so scared. We were worried. We didn't know what was going on because no one was telling us what was going on. I do actually remember once we arrived, my sister saying she didn't want to be here and wanted to run away. And I said to her, I was originally going along with that idea, but then I realised how high up we were, so we couldn't actually go anywhere. I just kind of had to put a brave face on because my sister was relying on me. And I think that's when me and my sister got really, really close.
So at this stage, you were staying with a foster carer with your sister. How did you find that sort of coming into the care system for the first time?
I do remember being quite, I don't really know what word I can use for it. I was not nice still. I was telling them how things were done. I was like, so kind of standing my ground, making sure they know that they can't mess with me. So I was mainly protecting my sister. They tried to take my sister upstairs to go and show her to the room. And I was like, she's not leaving my side. And she didn't leave my side those 2 weeks. They took us to the shop the next day and they said they handed me some money. He said, go and have a look around. They wanted to kind of talk to my sister by herself. And I was like, no, I'm not leaving her. It was a full on big sister mode. I didn't speak. I didn't let her speak to them. I didn't let my sister downstairs by herself. I was terrified of being there. I mean, they were absolutely lovely people and once we got to know them, I did kind of let myself a little bit less like that, and kind of in the end, I think my sister did be with them by themselves. And everything. Yeah, when I spoke to my foster care about the whole thing, I do remember her giving me advice. I can't remember the exact wording, but she was saying how she's had experience in the past and she knows that it will be okay one day, and that healing just takes a little while. And she said that includes you and also your family. She said you just got to give it time. You've got to give it a little while and they will come round.
Do you mind if I ask what the situation is with your family now? Have you been able to rebuild that relationship?
Right from the beginning, I always were worried they weren't going to believe me, especially my mum. I always knew she would never believe me. Yeah, that's the sort of thing. Yeah. No, has told me to my face that she doesn't believe me. Yeah, I lost half of my family, especially my dad's side. And then when I moved out, I lost my whole actual family. And then my mum's side, my mum and my nan, all that.
You've also told me that this includes not seeing your sister for a while now.
I missed out on her first day of year 7. I missed out on her 13th birthday. I've missed out on so many different achievements that a big sister always wants to be there for. So, and I know she's growing up without me, which is quite sad to see. Yeah.
Do you feel that one day you might be able to reconnect with them again?
I am a strong believer that will happen, but right now I do want to give them the space to heal, because it's not just only affected me, it's affected everyone.
Can I ask, do you feel that you had a voice throughout this whole process?
They were expecting my mum to speak to me, and my mum never gave me the right information, or gave me the information but saying you're not doing that or you're not doing this. It was always from my mum. My mum had every control, and I had none, because everything, I don't know, I feel like my mum asked them to give her the information so she could tell me. So I never was with a social worker on my own either. It was always my mum there, until we had to have contact time with her, and like that was the only time I could be with a social worker on my own, because the social worker took us there sometimes. My second social worker, she really didn't help the situation. She unfortunately felt like she made it worse. So there was the problem with leaking personal information by accident to someone else, which the whole court ended up, it sort of turned to talking about that. And I feel like she should have also maybe fought a little bit to speak to me by myself, speak to me without having people around and people that would influence anything I say.
For professionals that are listening to this, what advice would you give them about how to support children and young people who are experiencing sexual abuse or who are disclosing that to them?
The year before actually from the beginning, since I went to the school, even with my brother said that he didn't want to go home because he was scared of his dad. And I kept saying that I don't want to go home. My dad scares me. My dad's this. And I don't think the school did anything about it. I think because they spoke to the parent and then they were like, oh, nothing's happening. They didn't push it, which I feel like they should have done. Because I remember a year before I said that stuff was going on at home. I couldn't speak about it, but they didn't push anymore. I wish they did. I would say patience, definitely. Take time with them, listen to them. Don't force it out of them. Just let it come out and just listen and sit with them and just let them know you're there.
can I ask you as well, for other children, young people who might be going through similar experiences to yours, what advice would you give them?
No matter what people tell you, no matter who it is, even if it's your family and they say that they don't believe you, I would say 100% that don't listen to them. If you know it's true, it's happened, then you stick to that and you fight for your voice. Don't be afraid. That's the main thing. It's okay to speak out, and it's okay for the journey of speaking out to be long and a difficult road, but there's definitely a light at the end. Yeah.
So I wanted to thank AJ for sharing her story with us, which I think you'll agree is difficult to hear, but so important to listen to. So moving on from this, I was really keen to find out about what support is available in Somerset for survivors of sexual abuse, such as AJ, and was really pleased to be able to talk to Barnardos and the Phoenix Project in Somerset, who offer exactly that. So let's talk now to Barnardos to talk about the Phoenix Project and the work that they do.
My name is Jodie Pearson. I'm the team manager for Somerset Phoenix Project. I've been with Barnardos for about 8 years, working in various roles, domestic abuse, CSE, and I was around at the launch of Phoenix and was a project worker at the time, working with young people who were being referred into Phoenix, and have recently come back 10 months ago to take on the team manager role.
I'm Ellie Parsley. I am a specialist trauma recovery practitioner for the Somerset Phoenix Project. I've worked for Phoenix now for about 4.5 years. Previously, I worked for the domestic abuse, which was originally SIDAS with Barnardos. And then before that, I kind of worked in specialist provisions and mainstream education, working with traumatised children.
So I think this is an area that I think quite often there's awareness around the issue of sexual abuse, but I think sometimes less of an awareness of actually what support is in place around that. So thank you for joining me. It'd be really good to talk about the Phoenix Project today, but I think before we do, is it possible just to kind of go back a little bit? Because obviously the Phoenix Project sits within the umbrella of Barnardos, obviously a very well-known national charity, one of the leading charities in relation to safeguarding children. But if people aren't sort of really aware of the work that the Barnardos do, obviously quite often know the name, might not know the actual work that takes place within that. Would you be able to start off just by kind of talking about, firstly, the work of Barnardos widely, and then I guess sort of the work of Barnardos within Somerset, if that's okay?
So nationally, Barnardos has got quite a varied role, and you'll recently see that we've launched new advertising campaigns. We've got quite a strong focus at the moment around campaigning and preventative work around child poverty, supporting children and families who are struggling with cost of living crisis. But there's various services across the country around, universal services for children, but also specific specialist service around neurodiversity, safeguarding, crisis work, domestic abuse, sexual exploitation, and criminal exploitation. So it's pretty vast, really. I think behind the scenes as well, Barnardos is doing a lot of campaigning and advocacy at a really high level, government level, around the rights for children and young people and the right for them to have their voice heard. They have recently published a research paper called Changing Childhoods, Changing Lives, which is it's a really interesting read around current trends and challenges that children face nationally. I think in terms of local work, over the years, Barnardos has had services commissioned to deliver exploitation work for children and young people and domestic abuse work, including a perpetrators programme, which was a research project alongside the University of Bristol, which is just coming to a close. So it'd be exciting in the next year or so to find out the results of that in terms of how we can improve lives for survivors of domestic abuse. Currently, we have Somerset Phoenix Project, which we'll talk a bit more detail about in a bit, but we also have the Mandala Therapeutic Service. So that's a team of therapists across Somerset and surrounding counties who provide therapeutic support to abused children, and with a particular focus on adopted children and families. And that's been running for a really, really long time. So Phoenix has been around for, what are we in? Year 7. So we've been around for 7 years and been really lucky to hold that service for that amount of time. And it's been a real honour to do that. So we support children, families, professionals, young people with the ripple effect of sexual abuse and supporting them in their recovery journey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jodie. And a really, really important area of work. And I imagine quite a challenging area of work.
Yeah, I think it is a challenging area of work, but I think it feels quite an honour to meet families at a really vulnerable, difficult time in their lives and walk alongside them in that journey. So it always does, well, to me anyway, Ellie, still feels like quite a privilege.
I definitely agree. I think being in this role and meeting the young people and children and families that I've met along the way, the start they've had has been so terrible and the world has wronged them. And I think essentially like them even allowing me to come into their world, trusting me with that, forming a relationship with me with that is just so precious. And I feel very privileged to be a part of that journey. And I think Phoenix is just a starting point for these young people and children as it's a lifelong, journey for them. But I think, yeah, I feel very privileged to be a part of that as a worker for Phoenix, 100%.
We sort of referred to Phoenix Project then. So what does the Phoenix Project actually consist of? What does it actually look like? And I guess because get an understanding about what the team consists of, and
some wacky people,
yeah,
different roles within it, I guess, but also the kind of the sort of work that you do. And is there a kind of standard pathway in the work that you do?
Well, I could give you a bit about my role, Steve. So I, as I've said, I'm a specialist trauma recovery practitioner. So I work with the age range between like 1 and 18 years, but predominantly my role has consisted of working with teenagers or like 10 years old has been my lowest actually. Right. So my role consists of like working with schools. I tend to try and have a circle of support with that young person around them. And we kind of talk through kind of psychoeducation. Forming that relationship is the most fundamental, important bit about the work that I do. And that's the ethos of Phoenix, is that relational connection between each other. And then within Phoenix, we have like a number of other people that have like different roles that work with different age ranges. So we have like people that work with younger ones, so like the littlies, as our person calls them, the littlies, and we have other people that work with like teenagers and that older age range of like 18 plus.
That's what I was thinking, because that's quite a. I was going to say there's quite a skill range you'd need
massive
to work, right the way, like say from 1 to 18.
Massively.
So you've got sort of specialist workers within that who'd be able to kind of undertake sort of work.
Yeah. So we're really lucky in Phoenix because we're kind of made up of, we've got social worker in our team, an occupational therapist, a play therapist, obviously specialist trauma practitioners who specialise in recovery from sexual violence. We work in partnership with SASAS. They're our partner agency, so they provide our counselling for children and young people that are 13 to 18, which is lovely. Obviously, they're SASAS have a wealth of knowledge that we share between us. It's really beneficial to work with them. But our team actually consists of, I think it's about, we're in a bit of a change period, but I think it's about 4 full-time equivalent practitioners. Right. So in reality, that's 7 people, but not everyone's full-time. And we cover the whole of Somerset, so it doesn't go hugely far, does it? We do our best, but
you don't realise how big Somerset actually is. It's a huge county.
Yeah. And within that, so young people, in terms of referral pathways, like you were saying, Steve, about kind of, is there a standard format? Ellie's right, we're very much child and young person led. So we try and meet the need wherever we can. However, services are commissioned. There are certain criteria that we need to follow. I mean, we take referrals from either professionals, safe parents and carers or young people themselves.
Right.
And certainly we're seeing an increase in young people referring in themselves, which is great, and seeking help and support, kind of trusting that we're going to be able to help them in the way that they need. So once you've completed a request for support, we run a triage meeting where we get together and have a bit of a conversation about the request and about the needs of that young person and make sure that we are the right service for them. Following on from that, we make a decision in conjunction with the young person or the parent or carer, the person who knows that child best, as to what the right path is for them in terms of support. So there's several strands that you can follow. So we have direct specialist support, which is what Ellie does and what other members of our team do across the age ranges. And that is essentially looks like outreach support, where somebody is going to come along, meet with you in a safe space wherever you feel comfortable. And that might be at home, in school, out in the community. And they're going to begin to build a relationship with you. And at the point where you feel like there's a bit of a trusting relationship going between you and your practitioner, they can then start to think about whether there's specialist recovery elements that you want to look at in terms of, understanding what trauma means, understanding why you might have reacted in a way that is different from how it's portrayed in the movies when someone's, hurting you, and really help you in that kind of recovery pathway. And we do that for usually between 16 and 18 sessions, isn't it, Ellie? And they'll be weekly if that works for you. It can be fortnightly. We really try and adapt it as much as we can to meet the needs of children and young people. I think it's important to say as well, young people that are over 13, we don't necessarily need to tell your parents and carers that you've requested to work with us, or that a professional has signposted you into the service or referred you in, and obviously unless we were concerned about your welfare, but otherwise it's perfectly okay for people to access us confidentially, because it can be really difficult to have those conversations, Steve, with families. Like the children and young people can find that really hard.
Yeah.
So the other option is that for 13 and overs is to have counselling, which is done with SARSAS, and that's up to 24 sessions of trauma-focused sexual violence recovery counselling on a weekly basis. That's, I don't want to say deeper level therapeutic work, because sometimes people aren't ready for that and that's not the right journey for them, and that's fine. But it is more of the, what you see on the telly format of cognitive counselling, if you know what I mean, very much talking therapies and processing experiences. We also have a professional consultation offer. So if the professionals are out there thinking, I've got a young person at school, I want to refer them in, but they don't want to meet a new person, they don't want to build a relationship again with somebody else, and they don't want to talk about this with someone else because they trust me, we can work with you as the professional and just offer you expert advice, signposting, and resources on how to support that young person where they are in that journey. And we don't just do that as a one-off, we do it as a bespoke series of consultations, because it is bespoke to that young person. Every young person's journey is going to be difficult. Every young person's journey is going to be different. And it's really important that we tailor to that. So we'll meet with professionals on a monthly basis for an hour, and we can do that over 4-6 sessions to kind of start you on your way. And then you've got a point of contact as well as things develop, as that young person moves through their journey.
I think it's good with that as well, the consultation for professionals, because they're clearly doing a really good job, because that young person's come to them. We want to empower them to continue doing like the amazing job they're doing. And I think that's just really like valuable for them to kind of be a part of that with that young person, and just know that they are doing like a great job, and like we can just be a part of that, but from a distance, and that they can come with us and, somewhat kind of share or reflect upon how things have gone with that kind of 4 to 6 week kind of time.
I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the demands on the service, what are those like? Is it sort of fairly slow and steady, or do you have huge demand for the work you do?
Sadly, well, I say sadly, it's kind of bittersweet. So there is huge demand. And I think on the one hand, that's great that people are speaking out, and we're seeing an increase in requests for support, because I've got no doubt the need has always been there. On the other hand, obviously, we've spoken about numbers increasing and our concerns around some of those areas. So, I mean, currently, I worked out last night, Ellie, and that's quite staggering. But currently, we are working either directly with, so providing outreach support, specialist support and counselling, or supporting parents, carers and professionals. We're working with 65 children and young people.
Wow.
Bearing in mind there's only 4.5 of us.
Oh wow.
That's pretty massive, I think.
Yeah.
And kind of shows why we do sadly have a waiting list, because 65 between 4 of us is pretty massive.
Yeah.
So we do, in terms of our demand, Steve, we do have a waiting list of. So for direct support, it's really about 12 months now, I think, if we're being realistic, unfortunately. And for the indirect support options, probably somewhere around 3 to 6 months for professional consultation and therapeutic parenting support, it's really tricky. I think sometimes that feeds into. Sometimes it's quite a good point, though, to pick up recovery work, because that's the important thing to remember about Phoenix is we're not a crisis service, we're a recovery service. So quite often the knee-jerk reaction to disclosures is to speed everything up and try and fix what's happened. And actually the best thing to do is to slow down. So one of our main points of criteria, other than the fact you have to live within the Somerset area and you have to be under the age, well, right up until the day before your 19th birthday, you can refer into Phoenix, but is around the safeguarding element. So we would expect the crisis responses and the safeguarding to have been addressed by statutory agencies before you're referred into Phoenix. So naturally, we would, it says on our website that we prefer a few months delay from the point of the abuse ending to us beginning to even consider opening for recovery support, because it is more effective when things have calmed down and that child or young person has had a chance to process what's actually happened. And I don't just mean the actual event, but everything that goes around it in terms of, families breaking down, potentially having to move schools, being off school, maybe needing to have medical examinations or speak to a social worker, and they've never been open to children's social care before. They're all massive things. And actually, although it's incredibly frustrating if people are at the right point when they find us, that we have to say there's a 12-month wait, in lots of cases it's actually really beneficial, because by the time they meet their worker, they're in the right space and they've got a bit of headspace to really think about that. What we have done recently, though, is really tried to address, it's not okay for survivors to be sitting on our waiting list for a year with nothing. So we're really working hard to try and address that. We have lots of guides and resources and all those kind of universal things on our website. We also have training packages for professionals, and we have downloads where you can download videos around certain areas like dissociation for Somerset professionals. But for children and young people, there was a bit of a gap, wasn't there, Ellie, in terms of something that they could relate to. So Ellie created a wonderful webinar.
We created the Waiting Well webinar, which is where originally the original pilot was a 4-week of content. So young people joining me of an afternoon and just having some, on the Menti. I don't know if anyone's used Menti before, but it's amazing. I very much enjoy using it. But basically, it just has some basic psychoeducation and trauma pieces on there, and us to be able to have like virtual conversations about what young people on our waiting list are already doing, to try and empower them about the tools they already have in their toolbox, and to kind of help them feel like they're all kind of, everything they're feeling is very valid. And, and we have some really powerful parts to that. And I think we then, once we ran the pilot, we got the young people to then share with us what they thought about how it went. And it's now been extended to 6 weeks. And we've added 2 new subjects into that. So it's a 6-week program where young people can kind of come in and out of, there's no kind of set that they have to be a part of that. It's not compulsory. It's how they feel on the day. And we kind of talk about so trauma, the 5F responses. We talk about memory. We talk about sleep. We talk about speaking to loved ones about what's happened to you, grounding, self-soothing. So they all have their own little sections, but Jodie and I do that on a Wednesday evening at 6:00. And, this particular, always been so valuable, but this particular cohort of young people that we've got have been there word art posters have been absolutely amazing to let us know kind of what they're already doing. And I think it's just really powerful for them to see. So everything's anonymous. They don't have their names, they don't speak to each other, but the mentee allows them to communicate and create something quite magical together. So that's an ongoing thing that we've kind of added, and it's been somewhat successful, I think.
And whilst young people are waiting for us, they could come as many times as they want to that.
Yeah.
And we intentionally keep them quite short. So each session is
about 45
it's never
minutes.
longer than 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But that, whilst they're waiting for 12 months, if they want to come 3 times, that's fine. And if there's something else they want to hear about, they can tell us at the end. We ask them for feedback. So some of the other ideas we're exploring for young people that are waiting for direct support are around having little videos of us talking about a particular topic that they're interested in, perhaps having a Meet the Team Padlet that they can get sent to. And we were having a conversation even before we started, Steve, about whether, Instagram might be a good way to reach young people in terms of them waiting for Phoenix support and just getting some advice and guidance.
So just to sort of into that criteria, just to be clear for people, so it's more about recovery as opposed to, I guess, responding.
Yeah.
Is that a way to sort of summarise it?
Yeah, I think it is. But we would all, I never, ever, ever will say, no, we're not accepting this request for support and shut the door. So if the professional referring still needs some advice and signposting, we will still do that. Like, we will still try and link you in with current exploitation support in Somerset, for example. That's a big one that we get asked about quite a lot. And we absolutely will work with young people who have experienced exploitation, but once the exploiters have been dealt with, and we have a relative level of safety for that child or young person.
I was really pleasantly surprised, actually, Jodie, when you said just now that actually you're getting more and more young people self-referring, because I think I sort of was on an assumption that mainly referrals would come from children's social care, police, courts potentially, I don't know. But actually for a young person to self-refer must be absolutely huge. I couldn't personally imagine being in that situation, but that must have been must be a huge decision for a young person to make. And like you were saying earlier, Ellie, actually, if there's already that kind of trusting relationship with a professional working with them, actually it's about, and it's interesting, as we've talked already just now about, I think the word relationship came up time and time again.
Oh, yeah.
And that being so key to the work that you do, because that's the kind of foundation to do the work from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's healing. Sexual abuse is a relational trauma. It's somebody that's broken that. So, and these, young people and children living in a world that has, that feels very unsafe to them. So having somebody to come to talk to trust again is a massive thing. And actually, we have seen like a recent influx of self-referrals in, even my time, 4 years at Phoenix, there definitely has been more of a increase in self-referrals for sure.
And I hope some of that is in part because, there is no doubt that peer-on-peer abuse is something that we're seeing as an increase in our service for sure, and young people really struggling with having healthy relationships and healthy first kind of sexual experiences. And I'm hoping in part that is because survivors of sexual harm are feeling empowered to reach out and say that this is not okay. I also hope that, perhaps there's young people out there that have heard about Phoenix and know that their friends have had support from us, and that we do work from a very relational point of view, and will, absolutely honour your confidentiality and work with you where you are. Sadly, I also think it is a trend nationally, isn't it, that those kind of peer-on-peer abuse is on the rise, unfortunately. So we've currently we're going to do some preventative work around that, aren't we, Ellie?
We are, yes, we are. We've got a workshop happening at the end of March, actually, for professionals to come to about misogyny, which is currently fully booked. But we're going to see how it runs when we deliver it, and then if it's really successful and it goes really well. I think these kinds of things and subjects are really important to discuss. Absolutely. I think with the increase in peer on peer and general attitudes in society at the moment with what we're seeing, it is obviously impacting a lot of our young people and their views and ideas about how things should be and relationships should be and stuff. So this is offered out to professionals at the moment, but I think definitely having those really open discussions and non-judgmental kind of moments with young people are just really crucial in understanding like what their experiences are, and like how's that looking for them when they're heading into relationships or forming new ones with people that might seem to be having differing views to them. How do they cope with that? How do they deal with that? So that's happening at the end of March. So we're going to see how that goes, and hopefully that'll be successful and something we can continue to run, and looking at the complexities of misogyny, in society, and how's that impacting our young people right now? Because I think it definitely is.
Absolutely.
Both boys and girls, and it's not necessarily a gendered thing either, is it?
No, not at all. I think
both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Ellie's being a bit modest. It's her workshop. There's already 60 people booked onto it, and a waiting list of about 30, I think. So
great.
I'm sure there'll be more of those coming, Steve.
That'd be good. I know, it'd be good because it is a huge need, and obviously something that was highlighted within the 2021 Ofsted National Review. Sexual abuse and harassment in schools obviously came into keeping children safe in education as a big focus. But then alongside that, we'd see all the media attention of people like Andrew Tate and that culture of misogyny. And I know certainly colleagues from education are saying, look, we're seeing this all the time in the classroom. It's there. And certainly if anybody hasn't listened to it, we recorded a podcast around sexual abuse and harassment in schools with some members of Youth Parliament, young people, who were really clearly saying, this is part of our day-to-day lives.
For sure.
This is not a big sort of one-off thing or something that's just happened and then it's gone. This is part of our lives on a daily basis. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's opening up the conversation, but maybe not to like certain genders, but like generally everybody, because I think we're all somewhat guilty of having some unconscious feelings about things. And I think having those open conversations in safety with each other is really important. And I think as professionals, everybody, we're all part of that. And so hopefully it'll be really good. But I think also it's really important to put, with misogyny in this workshop, like there's a really good piece of work about hopes and fears of young people, which is you can just look it up on Google, and it's a massive piece of paper of like the hopes and fears of young people during the COVID pandemic. And I think that certainly has exacerbated a lot of things, around conspiracies and all those kinds of things that we're seeing from our young people now. And certainly within the Phoenix Project, I think we're definitely seeing views that necessarily wouldn't have been there before we were hit by, the pandemic. So I think it's really important to bring that into things as well.
I do think as well that's given rise to CSAM, so child sexual abuse material being circulated amongst peers. And I think there is a danger, Steve, if we don't keep championing this, that we're going to tip into a bit of professional fatigue. Because it is so rife, particularly in secondary schools, that I can understand with the pressure on education at the moment how that becomes further down the list of this is just how young people behave kind of narrative. And I think it's really important to remember that actually children shouldn't be viewing pornography. They shouldn't be having that constant stream of really quite violent, aggressive, pornographic acts that are circulated between peers, or indecent images of peers sent to somebody else in class without their consent, and so on and so forth. And I think as well with the way that technology is going, perpetrators are getting better at developing materials online using avatars and using, artistry, if you like, that essentially is still counted as CSAM. It still is, but the legislation isn't quite there yet. And that's a big part of the campaigning that Barnardos are doing in terms of protecting children. And I guess my ask would be for professionals not to turn a blind eye to that, because if we don't show there's a problem and a need, we're never going to have the backup to make any changes for our children and young people.
We are in a sort of a growing, evolving world around safeguarding, around abuse, and I think traditionally when you think about child sexual abuse, you would think about sort of direct contact abuse, interfamilial sexual abuse taking place. But like you say, I think evolving all the time. And, like you say, in terms of images that are being created who aren't even of real children.
Yeah.
And it's throwing up all those questions in amongst a world where we not only have direct access to instant information from all around the world, but also false information from all around the world at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And being sort of flooded with it. And I think young people, actually not just young people, everybody, having to navigate this really quite complex new world.
So confusing, so complex, and it's in your pocket, isn't it? I think that's the thing. There's no escape from it. And I think, there was a typology back in 2019 from the Centre of Expertise talking about the different CSA typologies. And what came from that was the two worlds of, the virtual reality, or digital, coming together and, and really merging. They are colliding with each other. There is no such thing as kind of that anymore, I don't think, because they are coming, that it's just all happening very quickly. And before we are ready for it to happen, I think we're not ready to deal with that, I don't think, as of yet. So it's having to act really quickly. But it's a really good typology to tap into, that one, and have a look at, I think. And that's on our training, isn't it? That we could kind of talk a lot about that.
And Barnardos hosts the Centre of Expertise that Ellie refers to. So the Centre of Expertise nationally for child sexual abuse, including exploitation, is hosted by Barnardos. And we were talking yesterday about exactly that overlap. There's loads of, if you Google them, there's loads of really useful research papers, infographics, lots of bits of stats and information available on their website. And it's certainly something, even in Phoenix, we hold quite strong to the fact that yes, we do this work every day. We've been doing it for 7 years, but no one knows it all.
No.
So knowing where to go to get the next piece of information or evidence or understanding of the experience of children and young people that have been through this is really important.
Just sort of going back to what we're talking about as well in terms of demand. And did you see a big sort of spike in demand or sort of continuing demand following some of the sort of the big kind of awareness issues like the Ofsted review, or kind of going back a little bit from that, Everyone's Invited?
Oh yeah.
The murder of Sarah Everard. Have you seen kind of an increase coming out from those? Yeah,
I think we have. And I think what we see as an increase in those is the self-referrals as well, or the parent-carer referrals. They both tend to spike when there's a little bit of a light shone on, this is abuse, this is not okay, essentially is what that media narrative is, isn't it? And feeling like it's okay to speak out, I think we definitely see a spike in that.
I definitely think Everyone's Invited opened up a massive door for people to give their own testimonies, to have their own time, to have their moment of sharing their stories. And I think, it's always something that I refer to when I speak to young people about, resources and things, as Everyone's Invited, because it is so powerful. They are absolutely terrible stories and break your heart, but these are people that are wanting their time that they didn't get. And I think that's where, self-referrals come in from, or the young person I've spoken to speaking to friends, and then there might be a self-referral coming from that. So it's just having that conversation and letting young people know like where these amazing Everyone's Invited movements are, or and other things that that are accessible. Say It Loud is also something on Instagram that's a really, really good place for young people to go to, and there's really good resources on there for people to have their moment as well. Like, it's just having that conversation with each other and not keeping it in secret, which I think has been a societal thing for a long, long, long time.
I think it'll spike again as well when the new legislation around not just education, but any provider that work with children and young people, if they become aware that there's been a sexual abuse offence against a child or young person, that they're bringing it into legislation that you have to disclose it, you have to seek support for that child or young person. You can't just brush it under the carpet, or we're all really, really busy professionals. It becomes really easy, like I said earlier, to minimise those what used to be seen as lower level abuse typologies. And the new legislation coming in will really support us in our campaign of saying, you must speak out. You're the voice for that child or young person.
And that's coming from the recommendations from the independent inquiry.
It is, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And it's interesting that, and we were originally expecting that to come in to working together to safeguard children. Update from this year obviously wasn't, and but you say it has been under consultation and will be coming in.
Well, I think it's important to get it right, Steve, because we don't want it to be a world where children and young people are disempowered, so they disclose to their teacher, for argument's sake, and that teacher goes, right, I need to go and tell these 5 people. That's not what that legislation means, and I think that's why it's undergone such a lengthy consultation period, to make sure that children and young people who've been sexually abused, like Ellie said earlier, have had all their power and control ripped away from them. And it's really important that we don't replicate that in our moments of support and disclosure, that we're doing the opposite. So it needs to be done in a balanced way, which is why I think it's taken a while for that inquiry to formulate the best practice advice that it can.
Are there common themes? Is it predominantly interfamilial sexual abuse? Is it predominantly peer-on-peer abuse? Or is it a real sort of mix?
I'm just trying to think of the people I've worked with in my past. It's been a lot of intrafamilial abuse, peer-on-peer, definitely. I think there is definitely an increase in that in new cases that are on my caseload. It's but I think it is a mixed bag. But I think there's that kind of idea that sexual abuse happens by a stranger, but generally it's not like that at all. It's usually somebody you do know that is trusted to be able to be that close to you. So yeah, it's always kind of maybe a friend or something like that as well. We've had many times of a family friend. Yeah,
either I would say predominantly, Steve, intrafamilial or the family network. So the close family friends. Yeah. Cousins, uncles, aunties, those kind of relationships, sadly, and then peer on peer, they're the predominant two that we get in front of us, but not the only ones, but definitely sticks out.
It's funny, I remember those campaigns when I was younger of stranger danger.
Literally.
Yeah. I know.
And actually how, unless you get it right, that can be quite damaging, because like you say, everyone's thinking all these strangers and you've got to be protect them, but actually it's like you say, quite often it's people who are in that direct kind of network around the child young person, has access to the child young person.
And I think it's a really easy way to manipulate and puppeteer the situation as well, isn't it? If you've got paedophilic or hebephilic tendencies and you want to target a child or young person, if you've already got a relationship with them, you're really confusing that bond. You're able to control the narrative around it. You're able to pile on secrecy, shame, doubt. And ultimately, that child or young person knows that when they speak out, it could shatter families. Like, I can understand why it's so hard to say what's happening. And also, I always think back to a young person said to me once, at the end of the day, you're asking me about what might be my first sexual experience, be it abusive or not. And nobody sits there and has that conversation with a stranger. You don't sit there in a pub having a drink, do you, with somebody you've just met and talk to them about your relationship as an adult and intimate partners. And yet we're expecting children and young people to make these huge disclosures and give huge personal accounts using words that are, shameful, embarrassing and awkward. And, we will always say, and probably quite important to mention, like, look for the signs, look for what the young person is trying to tell you. And quite often they'll make pre-disclosures. So they'll come out with bits of information that you think, well, why are you telling me that? And they're testing you as their person. Let's see if you're not going to shock and make them feel even worse about this big thing that happened to them out of their control. And I think once you start looking for those cues and those signs, again, Centre of Expertise have got a great signs and indicators tool that you can download. If you're starting to have these thoughts that just help you organise what it is you're seeing, because nobody wants to think the unthinkable, but it's really important that we do. And I think, sometimes we have young people that come to us and they're like, no one asked. That's why I didn't say, no one asked. No one saw it.
Quite often we imagine, in terms of becoming aware of abuse, we imagine, okay, we find out about abuse because a child or young person comes to us and they disclose something. But like you say, that to imagine how difficult that must be, absolutely huge. Talking about things very, very personal, extremely personal, which, like you say, you wouldn't generally sort of want to disclose to people. But also there's connotations. You could be removed from your family. Your family member could be removed from you. Absolutely huge.
It's like a grenade, especially if it's intrafamilial, like there's somebody or a sibling or something like that that's abused the young person, it's like a grenade going off in your family, because you've got such conflicted, confusing feelings about both, let's say, and how you're meant to navigate that. And and I think as well, we also need to bring light to these perpetrators who have also potentially groomed like the parents and family, and that's been a massive issue in some of the cases I've worked with, because it's been so hard to open up about that, because that person is so loved. And how are they ever going to change that or upset that? And that is just that's the biggest part, I think, when I've worked with a good few young people who are like, how am I ever going to get out of that person, because they are so loved within my network? How can I possibly do that? So I think it's also bringing light to like how other people within that process, instead of the victim or survivor, but actually like the family unit, are also very much victim to that perpetrator, massively so.
And that they're never to blame.
No.
It's the only person who holds responsibility is the person perpetrating the abuse. And I think, Phoenix, when we first started, we didn't have the capacity. I mean, there was 2 full-time members of staff across the whole of Somerset. So we didn't have the capacity to offer adult support. We do now. It's limited, but we do have capacity to offer safe parents and carers counselling for 16 sessions, and it doesn't have any bearing on whether their child or young person gets support or the professional network around their child or young person. It is just for them to explore that secondary trauma and that sense of, A, this has happened to my child, but B, I feel like I should have done something.
Yeah.
And that is, it's really beneficial, because like Ellie said earlier, children and young people often come to us right at the beginning of their recovery journey.
It is, yeah.
And I think one of our workers, Shelley, she uses the pink elephant analogy, where your role is to try and make the massive elephant in the room manageable, so it can sit on a shelf, and it will always be part of their life. And sometimes it will blow up and fill the room, and the elephant in the room is back. But we need to support to shrink it back down again and help that child or young person continue in their journey. Without a doubt, parents and carers are fundamental in that. Yeah. And professionals that have longer term relationships with those children and young people than we can as a commission service. I mean, we can do with some cases up to 24 weeks of support, but really part of our role is very much advocating and empowering others around that child to walk them through life, to keep that elephant in a manageable size. Yeah.
You sort of mentioned about the importance of asking, and young people saying, I was never asked. And I know, often children and young people, they will, this is a bad way of phrasing it, but they'll drop hints. They want people to ask. And I think quite often what I see is people being quite anxious, professionals being quite anxious about asking, about having that conversation. It can be a really challenging area, and I think for professionals can feel quite unsafe sometimes, thinking, actually, if I ask this question, how do I deal with the potential response here? And have you got any advice for any kind of professionals working with children, young people, where you think, actually, is there something there? How do I have that conversation?
We talk a lot about this in our training, because it's obviously when we have like how you can help part right at the end of the day. We've got through all the big stuff at in the morning, and we and that's always a massive topic of discussion. Is like I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong things, but essentially like that person, as I always say in the training, if that person has come to you, let's say, and there's something wrong, and you might not know what's wrong, but they've come to you, and you're trying to work out together what's happening. That's kind of like already an amazing start, because they are wanting something from you, and they need that from you. And I think that shows like the amazing relationship that you've formed with them. So I think it's empowering that actually, I don't think you are going to get it wrong. Because something already terrible has already happened in those moments. Having empathy and understanding and an openness that they've seen in you to then come to you, I think that in itself is like a huge thing that maybe doesn't get recognised, because we think about the question you're going to ask. But we don't think about like the non-verbal parts of things, where you are in the room together. What is that going to look like? And maybe they are just looking at you to ask those unthinkable questions. So I think to me, that's a really important part that I think gets overlooked sometimes as to what's already there and looking beyond the questions you think you have to ask, but having a conversation and seeing where that gets you. And then perhaps, being more confident enough to think about, okay, I've got my suspicions, because it's having those little pieces of the puzzle that you kind of need that form that picture. So if that's that one piece you still haven't asked about yet, having that in your mind, I think is really important to kind of bring up that actually you might need to ask those questions, but you are not going to get it wrong unless you literally leave that room when someone's disclosed and you're like, I ain't going to deal with this. I can't see how.
Or you hit the panic button and you go, someone's disclosed, I need to run off and tell my safeguarding lead.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think quite often that some of the worst things that young people share with us is that they might disclose to, I don't mean to just pick on education, but they see kids more than any other service. But so they might disclose to their TA or their ELSA worker or whatever, or at least, lean towards a disclosure, and then the next person they need to speak to is the DSL, is the safeguarding lead.
Alone,
and actually
sometimes
that's not the person they want to talk to.
No.
And we would always advocate that the safeguarding lead absolutely has a fundamental role in the journey, but their role is to contact the professionals that need contacting, to think about next steps in a kind of safeguarding capacity. Always leave the person who took the disclosure with the person disclosing,
Absolutely.
And just slow down, don't panic, be kind, be gentle. All of the things that if it was you, your child, your uncle, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, your stepson, whatever you would want for them in their journey, just come back to that.
But also, like, you've done a bloody good job because they've come to you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It should be an honour.
It's actually an honour. It is an honour and privilege to receive that. And I think you being part of that journey, and continuously so, we would always advocate that they must be side by side with each other as much as they possibly can, because that person has been chosen to receive that. So I think if you don't generally have that young person in front of you and they are wanting to speak to you, like, you've done a bloody good job already, to be honest.
They won't remember what you ran off and did and who you told. They'll remember how you were with them in the room and how you made them feel.
Yeah.
100%.
Always.
If somebody is receiving support from the Phoenix Project, what advice would you give around that kind of support network? Would you say it's better for that trusted adult to leave it to you guys and not raise the subject, or actually be part of that journey with them?
I think be led by the young person. That is the tricky bit. So sometimes we work with young people that their parents don't know what's happened. They don't want school to know. They just want Phoenix support, and they just want to be kind of working alongside us for that area of their life, because they don't want the ripple effect to affect those other things, leak into school or, whatever. It's very important for them to ring fence it. And then for others, it can take a long time, can't it, Ellie? So you might work with someone for 8, 9, 10 weeks before you can say to them, I really think we need to get mum on board, or dad on board, or, or your teacher. Let's think about how we can build this into, find someone else we can trust. And then others, it's really clear from the beginning that they, we definitely need a network around this young person, and they're open to that idea, and we can work with other professionals and advocate.
Yeah. And I think it's allowing for that circle of relationships to continue happening, because they've lost that. It's allowing for other people who are trusted by that young person to be involved in this journey with them, because they don't have the the relationships they should have had, because that's been broken and taken away from them. So say that TA that we spoke about just a minute ago, if I was to go into, and that young person was going to have support from Phoenix, and that was going to be me, that first person I'd be going to with that young person. But if I was allowed to, by the young person, to go and speak to their person they wanted me to within that school, would probably be the TA who received that disclosure, and go to them and be like, right, okay, because they are so important, and that joint working is essential, with that young person for sure. And I think it's very necessary to have that with a young person's support. For sure.
You mentioned a minute ago about, in terms of who's to blame, and often I know from working with children and young people, often they blame themselves. And sometimes there is kind of blame from people within the community, from the family themselves. And sometimes we sort of talk about language and how language can
Oh, don't get me started.
Right.
Go on.
Go on. Do you want, let's talk about language for a minute, because again, language changes, doesn't it? Evolves all the time, and
It does.
Again, I've had conversations with people where we talk about, a young person was putting themselves at risk.
Oh,
for
yeah.
example. And so, do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got quite a reaction when I mentioned that, so I'm assuming so.
It was a visceral reaction, I think.
I
I
might
could feel
just hand
myself
over.
flinching in the chair, Steve.
Yeah. What sort of things do you see?
Oh, got me to go. So this is one of my bugbears. You're going to get me on my high horse now. Because I think it's so important, because I think when you start using the wrong language about children and young people being responsible for their own abuse, that leaks into every bit of your work with that. They'll know, young people will know that you are positioning some sort of blame on them. So alarmingly, fairly recently, we've had, because quite often between me and our amazing admins, it'll be one of us three that see the initial request for support or the initial email saying, I need a hand with this case. I don't know what I'm doing. And I opened an email, and essentially it was pertaining to the fact that the child or young person had, she'd been a victim of sexual abuse historically and was now in her teenage years. And the email was saying that she had put herself at risk and allowed herself to be in the community where she'd been raped again. And it was those very key words that essentially are saying she has done this to herself. She has put herself in a position where this has happened to her. And I had to take 24 hours, Steve, before I replied, because essentially no child or young person, well, no person, hang on, let's take the child out of it for a minute. No person can consent to their own sexual abuse or rape. It's not a thing, let alone a vulnerable person. So a child or young person can never, ever, ever give consent to their own rape, sexual abuse or exploitation. And I think if you repeat that as necessary, it will stop you putting those sentences in documents that say they place themselves at risk of. They are never the person that is placing themselves at risk of. And quite often, if they've been traumatized in the past as well, they're blind to those risks. There's no good sitting there trying to justify how they are allowing themselves to be re-traumatized or to have repeat victimization. They can't. They are targeted. They are vulnerable people that are targeted by a group of adults or perhaps older peers or whatever that are finely tuned to seek out those vulnerabilities. And that'll be at a subconscious level often, won't it, Ellie? It's not even, but it's so important. And I would just always urge professionals to think about, if you were, whatever you're writing about that child or young person or their family for that matter, if you were reading that about yourself, how would you feel? And if the answer is not great, then you shouldn't be writing it.
No. And I think it's important to look at like the wider lens as well of, like, obviously there's professionals, but we've got society in general about the language that's used surrounding, big news stories that are about sexual abuse, or big figures that have allegedly committed sexual violence against other people, and how that comes across. So when say if that person has put that child as risky behaviour and they're then seeing that in society, you're hindering that for that young person to feel valued and understood, and they'll be feeling that blame and shame continuously. And shame is so hard to get rid of. It's such a curse for us humans to have. We always have shame, but it's really tricky to undo that. And I think, if you are playing that role where we already are seeing those things in society, we're seeing language that's really damaging and victim blaming a lot of the time. It's just adding to that, and it's adding to that wider lens of how difficult that makes it for that young person, for sure.
And I think we do it. It is so entrenched in society as well, isn't it? So without a doubt, boys and young men are horrendously victims of childhood sexual abuse. But if you think about the societal narrative around women and girls, somebody said this to me the other week, and it really resonated with me, that we teach girls to be victims from the very beginning. and apportion blame to them from day dot. So you teach girls not to walk down dark streets on their own, to carry their keys in there. These are all things I remember being taught.
Yeah.
To carry their keys in their hand in case they're attacked. The responsibility is then on that victim, that girl, to not allow herself to be raped, sexually assaulted, whatever, while she's out in the community or, at a party or whatever it might be. We're not sitting there going, please don't walk down the street and rape people. Do you know what I mean? Like, we do it in really subtle nuances in language, both in, like Ellie said, society, in professional articles, in professional analysis of cases. Like, it is really subtle. And I think the ripple effect and the impact later in life, if that young person wants to read their records, or, if it goes to court. We're doing some joint work with the Greenhouse Project at the moment, and they came in and gave us their Blue Star training last week around keeping, case records for court, and just to really make sure that we're really careful, because it can blow cases apart as well if you apportion blame to the victim. And if a social worker, for example, wrote, like the example I gave you about the email and saying she placed herself at risk, if that went to court, it would be ripped to pieces and used against that person who has, by no fault of their own, been victimised.
And you just mentioned the Greenhouse Project there. Is that sort of another project under Barnardos, or is that something separate?
No, it's separate. So they're a Bristol project who support children and young people in recovery from sexual abuse, and we have a very small bit of joint funding with them from the Ministry of Justice. So the main part of our commission is from Somerset ICB, so the NHS, but we have a very small bit of funding with Greenhouse to try and increase our capacity to reach out to very hard to reach children, young people and families. So that might be because of, I don't know, their culture, their background, displaced people, for example, who wouldn't necessarily know coming to this country that there might be a project like Phoenix Project. So we're doing some joint work with them around that. And recently we went up to Bristol and took part in a festival of activism. So called Beyond Therapy, and it's in its second year, but it's essentially a one-day festival that welcomes survivors, families of survivors, allies, and professionals, basically, and practitioners to come together and have a massive event. It was such a great day.
It was lovely, because it was about getting rid of the secrecy around child sexual abuse.
It was in a public space.
It was in a public space. It was open to the public eventually in the afternoon, so anyone could turn up to that. And it was, the cafe was still open, so they knew it was happening. So it wasn't hidden, it wasn't closed. And I think that's a massive stride in itself, that we are not going to be secret about this anymore. And I think, there were amazing workshops and panels of amazing people that were talking about really big stuff about healthy masculinity, talking about wearing masks. We did a workshop about masks, didn't we?
Our workshop was around essentially the masks that children wear, particularly with a focus on education, that what is being presented on the outside of their mask, be that anger or, attitude or whatever, isn't necessarily the felt sense inside. And it was really powerful, wasn't it? It was a really good day.
Yeah, it was.
But there was music there and poetry and some artwork. So yeah, we have done some small pockets of joint work with Greenhouse.
So are there any other sort of projects that you're involved in Somerset or sort of wider? So you referenced a Mandala project earlier. Are there any other projects that you want people to be aware of?
Yes, so Barnardos have done a partnership with the co-op stores, and basically we have highlighted they have highlighted 20 locations across the UK that are struggling with social mobility. So looking at how to make young people in these 20 locations happier, healthier, and to be able to access opportunities. And one of those locations that have been highlighted has been the Sedgemoor area. So predominantly Bridgewater and Highbridge. So part of my role as a voice and influence worker is to speak with young people and create a service, kind of like early intervention, I suppose. So like back to the good old days of youth clubs and youth work. And what's come from that, from the amazing young people we've spoken to in Sedgemoor, is that we are launching a social kitchen and board game kind of bonanza, which has been, this is what the young people have wanted, to cook together, to eat together, to be around each other. I think that's certainly, we can all understand that's probably been lost over the last few years. So we are just kind of in the process of creating this service in the hope to kind of launch that in kind of late April time. So it's all very exciting. So, there is kind of a loose kind of referral part of that at the moment, but I don't want to delve into that too much and get lost. But essentially, if the location has been given out, please, young people can come along to that. So that's a really nice project to kind of have for young people to kind of meet each other and be around each other.
And I think what's really empowering about that project is that one of the key pieces that Barnardos and Co-op agreed is that it had to be led by young people.
Yeah.
All the research into what this project's going to look like has been done by them.
And I think that is so powerful, I think, to have them. And for us, because, essentially adults aren't always getting it right these days. And I think they're a bit annoyed about that. So having young people to kind of be like, right, this is what we'd like. I mean, there have been some wacky ideas, I'm not going to lie, but the social kitchen has been a lovely concept that I
love that idea.
That I didn't think would be something they would choose. So that's launching in April. Yeah.
If anybody's listening to this wants to find out more about the work of Barnardos or the work of Phoenix Project or any of the other projects you've got going on, where's the best place to signpost people to?
So we would really welcome emails from people. I quite often get emails to either the Phoenix Project email, which is available on our website. So if you just Google Somerset Phoenix Project, you can find our email address and all our contact details on there. And I quite often get emails from professionals who are going, I don't have permission to put a referral in for this or a request for support in for this young person, but this is what I'm seeing and I need some help. And, we're not a massive service, but we will always do our best to offer best practice advice and signposting. And if I can't do that, someone in the team will. Just reach out, email us and nag us. We're very busy. So if you don't get a reply from me quick enough, please.
And from professionals that have worked with us before, I think for me, like when I've worked with professionals, I kind of always have that relationship all the time. And I think, so I get professionals that are still calling me up about random things they want to talk about and discuss. And I think that's really important because it carries on that relationship and that connection with each other to make sure that we're all doing what's necessary. So it's very valuable, I think. So anyone knows me, you know my email.
And if it's about one of our partner services, so if it's about Mandala or about the co-op, always email in and we will direct you to the kind of the best person to speak to. That's not a problem at all.
No.
That's great. Thank you. I'll pop the link for the Phoenix Project into the description for this episode if anybody wants to link on that. And it'd be great for them to link up with you and support the work that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
love that.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming in. And importantly, thank you especially for all the work that you do. It's a very challenging but very, very important area.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you've got any other projects in the future and want to come and talk about them, it'll be great to have you back.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Now, before we call it a day on today's episode, I wanted to go back to talk with AJ, who we heard from at the beginning of today's episode, and see how she's getting on now and what support she's been able to get.
I'm very happy where I am. I started therapy with the Phoenix Project, but they have definitely helped. And I've probably only done 5 sessions with them. I would say definitely feel a difference since speaking to them. And they're the sort of therapy where you can meet them wherever you want and when you want. And they're not the sort of person have a scripted therapy session. You could talk about whatever you want, and if you want to talk about something, you can talk about when you want, when you're ready. I definitely feel like I'm on the right path to start healing from it. Yeah.
A very special thank you today to AJ for showing the bravery and determination to share with us her story in the hope that it will help to improve the situations for others who have faced or are facing similar challenges to the one that she herself has experienced. And of course, to help to inform us about how we can more effectively safeguard children, as well as support those who have been affected by abuse. Now, if you've been affected by the contents of today's episode, please see in the description links to where you can find further support. As always, If you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in the episode description. If you enjoy listening to the ThePPod, we'd really appreciate it if you took the time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better still, leave us a review to let other people know about it. It really helps to spread the word. And talking about spreading the word, don't forget to tell others about it and encourage them to join us here as well. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guests today, Jodie Pearson and Ellie Parsley from the Barnardos Phoenix Project, to AJ for sharing her story to us, and as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.